Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Taproot's webinar, Grants 101, Plan Your Grants Calendar to Build Long-Term Funding Relationships. My name is Samina Osmani, and I'm the content manager here at Taproot. And before we begin, I'd like to just go over a few logistical notes. I'm joined by my Taproot colleague, Sierra Moore, who will be covering the chat box today during today's presentation. And all attendees will be muted, so please ask your questions, make comments in that chat box. And go ahead and introduce yourself and your organization right now. And this webinar is being recorded, so we will share the recording in an email later today. And as you can see, we have turned on closed captioning, but you do have the option to turn them off for yourself. If you go to the right sidebar next to AV Pod, you click on the gear icon, and then you can toggle off turn on captions. And now I'm thrilled to introduce our guest speaker, Cecilia Landor. She has worked in public serving nonprofits for over a decade, primarily in grant writing and strategy. Cecilia, thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for attending this webinar. I'm super excited that you are all here and ready to learn about grants. So let's get started. This grant webinar is sort of split into two parts. So the first part, we're going to talk about how to plan your grants calendar, how to create a really robust roster of grants that you can apply to. And then in the second part, we're going to turn to how to leverage what you've built into really great long-term funding relationships. So here's just a little overview of where we're going, and let's get started. So first of all, when you're searching for the grants that you're going to apply to, you're going to be casting a wide net. And so this is going to look a little different for each organization. It might depend on the kind of funding you need, whether you're trying to grow your grants program. Maybe you're applying for just a few this year, or you're really trying to build out your funding. Either way, you want to make sure from the very top that you're starting with a really wide net. So this includes kind of an internal and an external component. So inside your organization, you want to be able to find all of the grant opportunities that are related to your work. So locally, if it's a geographic area, people wanting to fund your town, city, or state, or subject matter, what your organization is serving, their mission. And so there's a lot of different email listservs you can get on, a lot of different bodies. Governmental, like advocacy organizations have listservs, and they will send out opportunities that come up. So a first step is just making sure that you are on all of the listservs where you can get funding opportunities. You don't want to be missing out from, since these opportunities can come up with pretty short notice of just a month or two. So making sure you have access is just a great place to start. And then the external component is, how can you make your work searchable, available, and accessible online? If you were a funder, would you be able to find your organization? Would you be able to find your organization if you were seeking out, the specific area of work you do in the specific geographic area you're located? So making sure that the people who want to be seeking out your work are able to find it on your website, through social media, through connecting to public media and opportunities, either on radio, magazines, websites, just making sure that you're putting your name out there so people will come across it, and when they see it, will want to know what your organization does. So moving forward, when you're doing this search, you want to use all the tools in your toolbox, which is a lot more than you might think. If you're part of this grants process in your organization currently, you might be aware of these different foundation search tools. Foundation Directory Online, Foundation Search are two of the more popular ones. I know Candidate Instrumental are newer, and I think they're becoming more popular. These are a really great place to start, and they're kind of going to be your bread and butter for finding foundation prospects. Unfortunately, because of the way that the grant searching process works, and if you are already have a subscription to one of these, you probably are aware of this, it's very difficult to just search for grant opportunities. It's very time consuming, and it takes a lot of effort, a lot of kind of knowledge about like how to search, how to do like terms and connectors searches in Google. And these search tools really bypass that whole process and allow you to search and filter very specifically. So, if you are a healthcare organization, you can search for foundations serving specific areas, serving specific type of healthcare organizations who have funded specific organizations. So this is really a great database when you're starting to create a list of grants that you want to apply to, and you want to come up with a comprehensive list of funders. This is going to be probably where you're going to start. Second is what we call reverse engineering your search. So looking to not necessarily the foundations themselves, but the nonprofits who are similar to you doing the work that you're doing, and the other foundations who are supporting them. So if you are, again, let's stick with the example of a healthcare organization and you serve youth, seeing what other organizations in your area or perhaps nationwide serve youth and have that healthcare component. And that allows you to see, okay, who else is funding these organizations? There might be people that you were just simply not aware of, but you know now that they're interested in this work. And so this is done through these tax forms called 990s. And if you already are in the grant process, you might be aware of these forms as places you can go to find really valuable information about foundations. So they're required to report certain things, how many grants they are donating each year, how much money, and then you can see a breakdown of the grantees and how much money they're giving to each nonprofit. And so I'm just going to pop to the next slide real quick. This is a prospect research template, and this is going to be available after the event. And so this is a really great tool. A lot of the issue in terms of prospect research is kind of time related. This is pretty intensive research, and nonprofits, we're all really strapped for time. And so this is something that's really good to have interns do, to have people who want to support your organization, but don't have maybe the credentialing they need for client contact, for volunteering. This kind of volunteering is really great to have people do. So that's something that you can make use of interns for. A lot of times college students, high school students want to volunteer with nonprofits. This is a great task. And then what you can do as the expert is analyze what they've researched. So they'll present to you a filled out template form, and you having these forms for the various foundations that you want to approach will help you build a more strategic plan and help you approach these with a little more planning, which will help you in terms of actually getting the grant itself. So in addition to interns, board members are going to be your other tool in your people power toolbox. Board members have a lot of different connections, and they're there because they want to support your organization. Think about how you can send them off to do work for you. People will ask you if they can do favors. Think about how you can use them. Do they have connections to a foundation? In that prospecting template sheet, you can put the board lists of the foundation and see if there are any connections between your board and the board of a foundation, if it's local, or if it is more driven by a specific mission or subject matter. Okay, moving forward. So variety in prospects, just for longevity and your organization being able to have funding year to year, you want to make sure you're getting a good mix of different types of grants. So if you're in the grants process already, you know that there's different types of foundations, and applying to a variety of them can just be really helpful in terms of making sure you're able to get funding. For mission-driven foundations, a lot of them have focus areas that they continue to fund year after year, but sometimes they may have, for example, after 2020 and the Black Lives Matter protests, there were a lot of foundations turning to racial justice funding. But you wouldn't want to, only have your organization funding from one of those types of programs, because it is likely that the foundation is going to kind of roll over and turn over programs that are more temporal, even though that shouldn't be a factor. So this can be a good place to just make sure that you are also casting a wide net and not limiting yourself right off the bat. This is another kind of from the top piece. When you are assessing what your grant needs are for the year, make sure that you are looking ahead and make sure that you're thinking of what kind of grant funding you want in terms of what kind of other funding you get. So I think we all kind of have an idea of how much we would like that probably isn't as realistic year to year. And a lot of funding should come from individual and events, but figuring out from the top, when you start your process of creating a grants calendar for the year or the next fiscal year, figuring out what are your funding needs and how many grants you need to apply to in order to meet them, knowing that because of various issues along the way, you will likely not be able to get all the grants that you apply for. So turning now to the next part of the presentation, we're going to talk about how you leverage what you did in the planning your grants calendar phase to building the long-term funding relationships that'll keep your organization going. So the first one is take your time with prospect research. This is going to be, prospect research might be 70 to 80% of the time that you spend at work if you are a fundraiser. And the reason that it is so much, and maybe it doesn't seem like it should be that much, but this kind of pre-work will be very helpful when you eventually turn to the writing of the grant. I think that we all tend to feel like we'll be able to write a really persuasive, compelling grant that, will get the program officer to fund us, even if we're not exactly in the right, kind of in their right focus area. If we come at it from an angle and we write it really well, maybe we'll get funding. And I think that, that is possible. That doesn't never happen, but it is also just, I think, a much more stressful process than spending a lot of time in the prospect research phase and then making sure your prospects are really good and really on point with what your organization does. So even though it can feel like a lot of effort, and maybe, this is why it's great to have interns do some of this work, because it is so time consuming, but this will really help set you up for success, because it can just be so frustrating to apply for a grant that sticking with the healthcare example, perhaps they fund healthcare for an aging population, and you fund or you serve youth. Even though you are both in the healthcare bucket, the fact that they primarily serve the aging and elderly populations might mean that even though they really like the work that you're doing, they're just not going to be able to fund it. And part of that is the relationship is not just with your program officer, but when they bring it back to their board and say, can you fund this? You're having to convince not just your program officer, but their board. And so that can be just really disappointing to not be able to get it, because it turns out to be not directly in line with what they want to fund. Find your ambassadors. So this is similar to the people power idea. There are people who will want to go to bat for you in a lot of different places. So board members, people who want to support your organization, but not at the level of the board. These are all people who can do things for you. I think that we don't, especially working for nonprofits, there tends to be this, I can do all the work myself, but really, I think that people underestimate how much people want to help other people, and asking people for little favors can really go a long way in just making these relationships. And then the external ambassadors piece is really important too, because your program officer and foundation contacts are going to be the people who you talk about your programs with and try to get funding from. And you want to be creating good relationships with them so that you can get funding from them, but also because the funding community is small and they have their own connections. And so having your external ambassadors, your program officers, and the people at foundations who really say, XYZ nonprofit, they just do great work. I really have great relationships with the people there. That will go really far in terms of being able to connect with other people. And then create roles. Help people who are interested and get involved. So this could be like the prospect template sheets. If there are people who want to volunteer with your organization, but they don't have, if you're a client serving organization, they don't have the credentialing needed. Helping with fundraising can be a great thing for volunteers to do, especially this kind of research where, I think people get kind of scared of fundraising. They don't want to ask for money. It feels icky. But the grants process is built, as you guys know, for people to ask money. I think it's already implicit in there. And so doing this research, I think, can be really easy for people to do who maybe feel a little more uncomfortable with traditional fundraising. So finally, developing the relationship with the funder. So this piece is kind of the most important part in a sense, but also everything else has led up to this part. So when you were researching prospects and doing your prospect template sheets and finding foundations who had served organizations similar to yours and funded organizations similar to yours, once you found that foundation, and once you've begun that contact, then it becomes the relationship building of how do you get them on board to want to fund your organization in a long-term fashion. So how I like to think about this is how can you serve each other? And I think particularly in fundraising, asking people for things is hard, but they also need something from you. If it's a foundation, they need to fund your work. That's the goal of the foundation. They want to support housing, healthcare, youth, education, and they can't do that without your work. And also they want to brag about you. They want to brag about what the work you're doing is and what the work of your organization is. And so it really is a mutual relationship. I think reframing it like that can help in order to kind of facilitate this relationship, because I think sometimes it can feel like, oh, I'm just asking them for money. But if you work at this, developing the relationship a bit more, and there's something called moves management, which is its own sort of system of moving funders up a relationship ladder. But once you start focusing on that, then it becomes much more personal, and you start to know your program officer and what they're looking for. So that can be candid conversations with them. Maybe a foundation, or maybe it's a corporate giving program. Maybe they're new to an area and they want to kind of assess the landscape, and you can help them by, showing them other nonprofits doing similar work in your area. Or perhaps it's an organization that has a very large staff and they want to do a volunteer day. That's something that your organization can provide them, and it helps both you and them. You're providing, the service. I think a lot of corporations nowadays especially really want to make sure that they are giving back, and you are providing that opportunity for them. And you're also continuing to build the relationship with them where they're like, okay, this nonprofit is a partner of ours. We're working together to combat a social issue. So I think that, there's different ways to do this. I think if it is a corporation, volunteering is really great. It's a great way to make people feel involved. And it is a really great way to bring in people who maybe were not aware of your organization, but work for the company that you have a corporate social responsibility grant with. And they can learn about your organization and they'll share it with other people. So kind of another one of these like internal, external combinations. And making sure you're in contact with them. So you'll be sending them proposals and reports if you are a grantee and you're in their grant process. but also send them other contacts. Like, it doesn't have to be constant. You probably don't want it to be constant, but how else can you show them that you're thinking of their organization and their organization is helping yours? So maybe sending them an update, an infographic, a picture of, if they volunteered, like a picture of how the work they did helped. Just these little points of contact really help and serve to facilitate a strong relationship that will have them going to bat for you. Because once you have built this relationship, they're going to want to be invested in the work of your nonprofit, not just for their own organization, but because they care about the work your organization is doing. And so this really, leveraging that contact with them helps you get more funding from them, and also just helps you in the funding landscape in general. So that is the presentation on Grants 101, and we're really happy to answer any questions you have. So I'm going to pass it back over to Samina for questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Cecilia. We have some great questions coming in. Please keep adding them. First question is, how do you get on the listservs that you were mentioning?
Sure. So I think a lot of these are going to be connected to government agencies, universities systems, state university systems, and kind of advocacy groups. So I would say if there are any government agencies that you are aware of that serve your population, I would look on their websites, get in contact with someone there, because they will know of the existing listservs. And I think that's true about universities too. If you have, especially for kind of human services facing work, universities who are engaged with, work with those populations in some capacity, law schools, social work schools, those are going to be great places to go to too. I think institutions will have a lot of this knowledge already, and so you can just ask them where are they currently, because they'll also be wanting to be on listservs so they can get funding opportunities. So I think finding people who are currently in those spaces and just asking them where they are seeing opportunities currently and what listservs they're on is a great place to start.
Great. And do you have to pay for these search tools?
So unfortunately, you do have to pay. They do seem to all have a subscription model for these search tools, but I will say the price points vary a lot. And I think that it is more than worth it. I think what you can do if, of course, money is tight for many nonprofits. And I think these aren't subscriptions that you have to have permanently. The other thing is, if you are in a major city, you may have an office of, I'm from Chicago, and we have something called Forefront there. And so you can go to the Forefront library and use their resources. So it's possible that wherever you are, there might be something similar where there is a fundraising library, like a nonprofit of sorts, where you can have, access that subscription for free. But even the paid subscription, I would say, is worth it if you're able to do it, maybe a month or so a year and just see what else is out there, because new foundations are being created all the time.
Okay, great. And what are your thoughts on Grant Watch?
Grant Watch, yeah. I would say Grant Watch is not one of the best. I think what's hard is it feels like it like a more free version, but it really isn't. The opportunities are, they do have, there is a paywall format behind it. And so I would say, for your own peace of mind, it could be really worth it and really helpful to get a subscription and to just spend a little time, making a list. Because once you have the list of foundations, you can go off and do all your own research. All the websites are available just publicly on Google. But for some reason, there's just this issue of finding, gathering a list it's very time consuming. I think the way to not do that is do the reverse engineering your searches. So seeing who else is funded, is getting funding, if there are organizations who serve similar populations. I would say that is probably my best recommendation over Grant Watch.
Okay, great. So someone is saying many foundations say they don't accept open solicitations. How do you go about connecting with foundations if their process is closed?
Totally. This is a great question and something that, yeah, we have to deal with a lot. So the first thing is, if it's closed, don't submit a grant. Like they'll just reject it and it'll be kind of a wasted opportunity. What I would do is send a letter of inquiry or make contact with a program officer over email. So if they're interested in your focus area, I think it's going to be a much kind of harder battle if they're not specifically interested in your focus area. But this is the thing where it's making contact with people. I think having that human contact of, this is what my organization does, is this something that you are interested in funding, can be very helpful. And I think a lot of places do have this closed solicitation thing because they get so many unsolicited applications that are just completely outside their funding areas. So making that effort to reach out to a program officer and show them, I've done my research. I know that your organization funds work similar to ours. Here's what we do. Can I set up a conversation with you? Or send them a letter and say, these are our outcomes from this last year. We work within your area and we'd love to explore the possibility of getting funding. So there's definitely don't see it as like a locked door, but just something that you can try to get around with some personal contact.
Okay, great. And which grant search tool would you recommend?
Sure. So the ones that I have experience with are Foundation Directory Online and Foundation Search, both of which I think are very good. I think Foundation Search might be a little more expensive, but Foundation Directory Online, I think it was formerly called Foundation Center, is excellent, very easy to use, and I think a bit cheaper. And that's the one too that you may be able to find a library, maybe a university library that already has access to that, and you can just go use it on occasion. But I think those two, Foundation Directory, Foundation Center Online.
Great. And how do you find international donors or organizations?
So those websites should also include funders outside the US. I think most people do use them to search within, by state, if their organization serves Wisconsinites or something like that. But they fully are international. And I think for international too, getting on listservs is a great idea. Different government agencies have various opportunities. And I think government funding for international work is a different process than government funding for work here. So I would look both in governmental agencies for that, as well as those resources.
Great. So we only have 1 minute left, and I wanted to go over some remaining issues, but I do want to ask, please keep adding those questions if we haven't answered your question, your concern. We will try and answer them after the event. But I did want to go ahead and lead one great question is, are there Taproot volunteers available that can help support in prospect research, help applying to grants? And that goes right into my next comment. Yes, they are here. They are available to help with any aspect of your grant process, the grant strategy, helping you write your grants. Please just go to taprootplus.org and you can sign up and you can register and start posting projects to try and find your skilled volunteer. Now with that, I also just wanted to let everyone know our next webinar is October 25th, and it is Get Your Nonprofit, the Support You Need for Free. is actually during the Global Pro Bono Week. So we do welcome everyone to join for that one. And on behalf of Taproot, I just want to give a huge thank you to Cecilia. Thank you so much for your insight. And for everyone, we'll be sending an email later today with helpful resources that Cecilia showed and a recording of the webinar. I want to thank everyone for attending and have a great day.
Thank you so much for attending. I'm really glad about your participation. I'm glad this was helpful.
Great.